Real stories of werewolves, of Dogman from history, from your emails, illustrated and animated with the democratizing magic of machine learning AI. Welcome to Scary Stories.
2024, will we survive? It seems harder and harder just keeping alive. I'm really sick of starving and junk. But hey, at least now it's Halloween month. Halloween month, Halloween month. Let's try to forget about the stupid junk. We'll try to tell the scariest selections. And we promise not to talk about the stupid election. It's Halloween month on Scary Stories NYC. Your shelter from the insanity of what they try to tell you is sane.
Dogman and Bigfoot team up to wipe out human civilization. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I don't know if the world will still exist by the time you read this email. It seems as though there are active movements today trying to destroy Western culture. I believe the lunatics pursuing decreasing the human population and removing agency from the vast majority of the human race, reducing us to living in pods and eating insects, have miscalculated. Just as a huge YouTube channel can collapse under its own weight if it stops gaining followers, so too a human civilization considered too big to fail, built upon the concept of constant ever-increasing growth, can sputter and literally become extinct if it stops expanding. The elites looking to reduce the human population by staggering amounts don't understand that doing this seals their own death warrant as well. We are a species who can only survive by constant expansion. It's expansion or extinction, and our own global leaders have decided to contract. These people never consider the other humans, the proto-humans, the almost humans. I'm talking about the Dogman, the Bigfoot, the dwarves, the elves, the fae folk. Oh yes, I know from personal experience that they are all real. And yes, they do tend to move in wherever humans move out. This was never something species-threatening before, but in 2022, as an officer out every night on the highways, I see how things have changed. Just since the beginning of the pandemic, the strange ones have become far more open about their presence. They don't even seem to care if you see them anymore. And the most terrifying recent change to me personally is that these non-humans seem to have begun to team up with each other against not only humanity, but our entire sense of reality. These creatures you see are both real and not real, at least to us for now. If they decide to become fully real in our reality, it will no longer be our reality. Just as the USA stays on top because other countries trade using the dollar, other entities and species use our reality as the basis of their existence. However, if humanity is deposed as leader of this planet, so too will our reality be overthrown. Insanity might become the new sanity. On some days, I feel that this has already happened. I recently, for the first time, was literally physically accosted by one of these cryptids as others stood by, expressing amusement at my predicament. I'll give you the details. There was a car off the road, and I called it in before pulling over to investigate. The car's passenger seat door was open, and the individual who most likely had been driving was lying face down on the grass to the right of the car. It looked as though he had been pulled out and left unconscious on the ground. Standing around, staring at him, were 6 or 7 hairy, upright beasts. My initial impression was that I was seeing a group of dog-headed men. There were actually 2 young squatches in there too, which I did not notice until later. They all just stood there, staring downward, and that helped me to get close. No eye contact to alarm them as I approached. I needed to get close to that man and determine if he was alive or if he needed medical attention. I just sidled up to him as though the crowd were any other crowd of bystanders, as though they were human. At first, they just allowed me in, as anyone else would have done. After some time, I began to hear a very low growling, and I sensed that the crowd was turning against me. I stood up, trying not to let any of my fear show. They had not impeded my movement or taken any action against me so far. I had to continue to assume that I was the one in control of this situation. I used to have a dog that was an angel to me, but literally sent a prowler to intensive care one time, so I'm pretty good at signaling my alpha status to canines and having them fall in line and be agreeable. This time, it wasn't working. I'm not sure which of them started the growling, but it spread. One upright canine was whining, as though he were intensely stressed out. It was not a good vibe. I needed to get both myself and this injured unconscious victim out of this dangerous scenario and away to a hospital. My initial plan to call for an ambulance seemed a quaint notion in that situation. I got lectured off the record afterward by my boss that I should have called for backup and an ambulance, then waited at a safe distance. My argument back was that the accident victim was in bad shape and needed immediate attention. I recognized that I was placing myself at risk, but I saw it as necessary to get that man medical attention before he left us. So I grabbed him by the shoulders, and I began walking backward into the crowd of upright walking man-things. They cleared a path for me, and I dragged the man to the side of the road. Then I opened the back door, lifted him in as gently as I could, closed the door, and began the walk around the car to the driver's seat so that I could make my getaway from this scene. So all I needed to do was walk up the side of the car, turn, walk around the front end, and get in that driver's seat. In that moment, though, it felt like that was not going to happen. The upright dogs and the long-legged gorilla people were all facing in my direction. I refused to look up at them, but it seemed that they were looking at me, and that they were slowly crowding me. I changed my mind and turned around, deciding to walk around the rear of the car instead. A canine jumped me from behind. One of the dogs, probably the shortest of them, leaped onto my back. It was not a small dog, just small compared to the others. Imagine a large German shepherd on your back, claws dug into your clothing, trying to reach around your neck to bite your face off. That was what was happening to me. When the other creatures saw this, they became emboldened. I didn't just see Dogman. I saw sasquatches as well, and all of them were growing surly and unhappy. The shortest of the canines stood between 5 and 6 feet tall, while the bigger ones were taller than any man I had ever seen. The squatches were, I guess, between 6 and 7 feet tall themselves, and they gave the impression that they were young. Not young as in children, but maybe teens or young adult Sasquatches. That was just a feeling I got off of them. I'm hardly a Bigfoot expert. I do want to note and emphasize that there were both upright canines and Sasquatches together, all of them bipedal, along the side of the road. I thought at the time that they had gathered to gawk at an accident, but judging by their unfriendly reactions toward me, I kind of wondered almost from the start if they might have even caused the accident in the first place. Together, they seemed to possess a sort of communal culture or thought process. It felt like they understood what was happening a whole lot better than I did, and that I'd better get off their turf as soon as I could manage it. I want to mention here that I am not talking about werewolves. I am talking very strictly and literally about upright walking canines, and I am talking about ape-like men that I assumed were sasquatches. I am not talking about that werewolf with hands and the big broad weightlifter chest that you show in your thumbnails quite often. These were various kinds of large canines that stood on their hind legs. They had various kinds of fur, but were generally dark. They had paws, not hands. I never saw them drop to all fours, so I don't know if they were capable of running that way, but they seemed very stable and natural up on their hind legs. It didn't look like a trick they had learned, and they didn't look uncomfortable or unbalanced. I ran around the front of the car, and the crowd of them came at me. I turned my back to them, using my attacker as my shield. When his own kind slammed into him, it caused him to lose his grip on me, as well as pushing me forward ahead of the pack. I got most of myself inside the driver's seat and reached to start the engine before I got my left leg in. The creatures ran into the car door, which in turn slammed hard into my shin, giving me a hairline fracture that I wouldn't find out about till later. You want evidence of cryptids? You should feel the pain in my leg when it's gonna rain. That's my proof that cryptids are real. I started the engine and I drove, even as my foot was still caught in the door, and I was screaming in pain. It hurt so bad that I was nearly delirious, but I managed to keep my right foot on the gas, and I managed to steer that wheel well enough to keep me on the road until the beasts gave up and allowed me to go. It hurt so badly pulling my leg into the vehicle that I screamed and cried, and then I must have gone on autopilot. I literally don't remember what happened after that until I woke up in a hospital bed later that night. Somehow I had driven both me and the victim to the emergency room. I wonder if I had a guardian angel doing the driving, because I literally have zero memories after bringing my leg back into the car. I've read a lot about Dogman and Bigfoot since this event, obviously. I've read that they can run between 20 and 70 miles an hour, depending on the account in question. I don't think I got to witness anything like that, unless they ran after me during one of my blacked out memories. I think they just crowded around until I started to get the car up to speed, and then they just backed off, sort of how it might happen with a crowd of humans, or any other kind of hostile bunch of animals. I guess I'm lucky none of them ran after me, as I was not in much of a state to do anything about it. Another utter mystery to me was why I never pulled my weapon, not even to fire it in the air and possibly spook the animals. That's something that should have been a natural thing to do, and yet I never considered it, as far as I can remember. The entire event had an odd quality to it, as though logic itself had become illogical. Nothing was ordinary about any aspect of that event. So the victim survived. At first, he told me that he crashed because he came upon those creatures blocking the road, and he had to swerve to the right, suddenly. He landed in a ditch, and then he said the creatures dragged him out of the car and whomped him. Curiously, they did not tear him apart, they did not eat him. They just acted like they were in Grand Theft Auto and dragged him out of his own car to beat him up. By the way, he later denied having told me any of that, and insisted that I made up all the stories about hairy monsters. This is why I'm not talking about this story on Discovery Channel or something, but instead telling it anonymously on your show. I've got nobody to back me up that this really happened. I think the most terrifying aspect of any of this was that the victim told me that the creatures had formed a roadblock of their own accord. They seemed to be doing this in a premeditated way. They were acting like the highwaymen of old, except they didn't take the guy's money. Their intentions seemed purely to mess the guy up, to bully, and terrorize him. This is not usually how animals behave. In fact, this is far more like the behavior of human criminals than anything else. I saw them, though, and they were not human. They were monstrous kinds of animals, too intelligent for the forest, but too savage for human society. And if they're banding together now, if they're joining forces against us, at a time when our own leaders are trying to squash us down, then this might be a harbinger of a disaster far worse than anything our species has had to endure since the last ice age almost wiped us out completely. But it's not like the whole world would cease to exist. It would only go away for us humans. In our place, there would be plenty of dog-headed and ape-headed humanoids, like the ones who caused that accident. I hope nothing comes out of any of this, and that you can look back on this email years from now and laugh about it. But right now, I'm living a real-life nightmare. Every night, I look around me, and I see signs that Dogman and Bigfoot are teaming up to wipe out human civilization. Sasquatch chased by Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have always maintained that I had no cryptid stories to tell, but as I recently attended services after my father's passing, I was reminded that, in fact, I do have an excellent cryptid story to tell. It didn't happen to me, it happened to my parents. But since they are now both gone, I suppose it's up to me to pass the story on. The way they would always tell me this anecdote was to say that it happened during their vacation trip in the woods, in which I was conceived. Actually, the part about me happened in the first half of their week in the cabin in the forest, when everything was quiet, peaceful, and romantic. There wasn't much more snuggling time after the raging, howling cryptids showed up. Now, I've been advised that most of you who watch this channel want to hear about Dogman, and just want to jump to those parts of the story. While you're free to do that, this story starts off being about a pack of Bigfoot Sasquatches, and the Dogman part might not make much sense if you don't listen to me explaining the Bigfoot part first. Still, you're free to do what you like. So, very soon after they got married back in the 1950s, my parents took a vacation at a log cabin in the northwestern Pennsylvania woods. They had been unable to take a honeymoon due to work considerations, so to make it up to them, Dad's boss lent them the use of his cabin for a belated honeymoon a few months later. Now, this is the part of Pennsylvania that's up near upstate New York, but also close to the Great Lakes region. As they were about to learn, that's an area that overlaps both Dogman sightings and Bigfoot sightings. There are plenty of stories about both cryptids all around that region. Before they headed home, Mom and Dad had experienced enough cryptid encounters to last them a lifetime. Since I grew up a monster kid, loving horror movies and Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of, I loved to hear that I was conceived on the turf of both the Bigfoot people and real living werewolves at the same time. In fact, I take it as a point of honor, and I believe that makes me part monster myself. Just kidding. Actually, I'm glad that all my cryptid experiences happened while I was still forming in the womb. I don't think as an adult witness that I would have been as calm and collected as my parents were. I can't imagine I'd do anything but freak out. Like when I hear people say that these creatures seek out people to scare them because they feed off our fear, I say they're missing out on a gourmet meal with me. I even get scared at Abbott and Costello movies. I don't even need gore or anything to cover my eyes. I like being scared by movies, but I'm really bad about scares in real life. Not so my two late parents. They never feared anything, as far as I can tell. So after a few days of honeymooning and conceiving me, things turned dark pretty quickly. One night, the cabin started getting pelted with rocks from the outside. They looked out the windows, but were not able to see who was doing this to them, assuming they were either taunting teenagers or troublemaking locals. My parents shuttered the windows and endured it for the night, planning on leaving the next day if it continued. In the morning, the sun shone and the birds sang, so they felt less paranoid than the night before. Taking a walk around the edges of the surrounding woodline, they found what they took to be barefoot human tracks. Neither of them took note of the size of the tracks that morning, so possibly they were seeing tracks of juvenile sasquatches, whose tracks are said to look far more human than adult Sasquatch tracks. This seemed to confirm to them that locals were targeting them for some reason, which they didn't know why. Maybe just because they were from another location. It could have been as simple as that. It was unnerving, but my father was not afraid of much, and he decided they'd stay one more night to see if the trouble was already over. That night, again, stones began to be thrown onto their roof from the surrounding woods. They were coming from multiple angles, so there had to have been at least 3 different individuals taking part in this. My father told me that he wasn't really scared of whoever was doing it because they continually threw the rocks onto the roof. They didn't throw them through the glass windows, which might have actually been easier to do. They seemed to want to be annoying, not to destroy anything. So Dad decided to take his boss's rifle off the mantle, dust it off, clean it, and load it with one shot. Then, if the rocks were still falling on the house, he'd decide what to do then. Well, they were still falling by the time he was ready, and Dad decided to open the front door, walk out onto the little wooden front porch of the place, and to announce that playtime was over. "I'm afraid I'm going to need you boys to stop throwing rocks at my wife and myself," he announced loudly and clearly. "I'm going to need you all to go on home now." He listened. There was absolute silence all around. "I'm going to need you to leave. And now," he said even louder, and he punctuated his sentence with a very loud warning shot in the air. It echoed and echoed throughout the region, but other than that, there was no other sound. Noting movement in his peripheral vision, Dad turned and saw this chimpanzee man come walking silently from behind a tree to show himself. He had to be as tall as my father, and he was clearly far stronger. In front of Dad, a far taller, far more terrifying-looking gorilla man sauntered out into view, looking oddly bored. You know how Bigfoot are said to stare at people from behind trees? Well, this one was looking around at anything but my father, but Dad knew he was showing himself on purpose, even if he refused to make eye contact. At this point, the ape-like beings, who ranged in size from 6 foot to possibly 10 foot tall or more, began displaying agitation. One shook a tree, sending leaves flying. Another shook a nearby bush angrily. Dad couldn't count them all, because they seemed to be showing themselves, then retreating back into darkness, only to reveal themselves in a different location the next time. They were circling him, but some were moving clockwise, and others moved counterclockwise. If Dad and Mom tried to escape through that gauntlet, they'd be easily caught by those beings, which we have to assume were Sasquatch. One time one of them appeared to yawn, and even that was intimidating, as Dad saw the almost cat-like fangs, the immense and dangerous teeth of an apex predator. Dad had only loaded one chamber, and had no means of response to this new challenge. He had played his hand, and was out of ammo in both a literal and figurative sense. So he turned around and started walking back into the house. Bam! A baseball-sized rock slammed into the doorframe to the left of him. Whiz went another rock just past his right ear, ricocheting off the door into the cabin. It just missed Mom's leg before it crashed into a chair. That began a barrage in which the exterior of the cabin and the roof needed extensive repairs from afterward. This time the creatures did throw at the windows, but fortunately my parents had closed the wooden shutters over them earlier, and no glass was broken. Apparently Dad had made an extreme faux pas in the opinion of the Big Feet, and this time their barrage lasted for hours with the ape men dancing frantically outside the house in ecstatic fury. One of them took the lantern-shaped light that had been on the exterior of the front of the house, tore it off, and threw it back into the house over and over again. Watching through the slats of the shutters, my parents said it looked as though those animals had become as crazy as a human mob, which is a truly frightening notion. Then there was a howl outside. It was quite close and extremely, ear-splittingly loud. All activity and movement outside ceased in an instant. You couldn't even hear crickets, and all the squatches ceased their barrage of stones. Mom and Dad ran to the windows and squinted through the slats of the closed shutters. There were squatches everywhere. They were running from behind the house into the woods in front of the house, and there were far more of them than they ever would have guessed. Some were larger than that 10-footer, and some were so small they looked like 3-foot-tall gnomes running by. What were they all running from? Well, it's possible they were running from a group of things, but Mom and Dad only ever heard that one howl, and they only ever saw one single beast chase after those squatches. Racing up from behind the cabin to in front, my parents witnessed one of the most famous of all the Midwest monsters. They saw a fully grown Dogman, which at that time in the 1950s they interpreted as a werewolf. For all I know, it was a werewolf, but I think they saw a Dogman. It stood very tall compared to most men, but not over 7 feet. Yes, I do mean upright, as my parents did not see him down on all fours. He ran on his hind legs, which they described as animal legs. I take that to mean canine hind legs, although honestly I never did quiz them to be more specific about that. I also never asked them if the werewolf had paws or hands, or whether his front legs were more like legs or arms. I honestly never thought about stuff like that back then, and I wish I had when there was still time to ask them. The bipedal dog turned around a couple of times like he was looking for something, giving them a decent view of his bright eyes and his tall pointed ears. He was either a wolf or a dog or some ancestor or descendant of a canine species in Dad's opinion, but unlike anything he'd ever seen before or would ever see after. They watched the upright dog chase after the ape men into the brush and out of their sight, and then my parents went to bed, planning on making an early break for it once the sun came up in the morning. However, once again, things were so peaceful in the morning that they decided to stay there the final 2 days. They somehow sensed that the mood had lifted, and the squatches had been chased off for the duration. Dad used to joke that a werewolf is a man's best friend. It's kind of funny in retrospect, come to think of it. I mean, they saw the Bigfoot as hostile toward humanity, and they saw the Dogman as the savior of humanity. If anything, those are both the opposite of the cryptid's modern reputations. Dogman is generally considered the most terrifying and the most violent of American cryptids, while at least in some areas, Bigfoot are seen as quiet and shy. I know that not everyone agrees with the image of the docile and timid Bigfoot, but certainly it seems most people interested in cryptids tend to see the Dogman as the more savage and feral of the two species. Yet my parents saw it the other way around when they had their bizarre experience way back in the 1950s. So no wonder I grew up fascinated by monsters. Their smell was literally in the air as I was created. It was breathed by my mother and shared internally with me. I literally lived and breathed cryptids before I was living and breathing, if that makes any sense. They've always been a part of me, even if I've never seen one with my own 2 eyes. Other people are raised on fairy tales told to them by their parents. I grew up being told the true tale of the time when my parents witnessed Sasquatch chased by Dogman.
If I wear a spinny hat, will I look all hunky? Will I look like that handsome chap from the TV show The Monkees? If
Everybody wants a woolen cat. The scary stories, beanie hat. Everybody knows it's a natural fact. The scary stories, beanie hat. Link is in this video's description if all goes according to plan. Available in black, which is like every color all at once, man.
Dogman and Bigfoot teaming up against humans in suburbia. Now, before I begin this narrative sent in to us by someone claiming to be a law enforcement officer in the Midwest, I need to say a few things about a number of comments I've deleted which came in response to last night's Bigfoot vs. Dogman video that YouTube suppressed almost completely. Almost none of you had a chance to view this video, yet certain crazy, ignorant, obnoxious fans who view themselves as Bigfoot gatekeepers decided I needed to be dogpiled on for sharing your stories sent in to me. You know, we get requests to do Bigfoot and Dogman stories, which feature the two together. Then when we do the stories, we get attacked by people calling them fake in an obnoxious and vaguely threatening manner. I'm not going to be like Lucasfilm and accuse all Bigfoot fans of being nasty things, but there are certainly a lot of people who think it's okay to openly attack you simply for discussing squatches and big feet. Not so with Dogman, where the audience seems far more open to listening to what other people have to say. If you already know everything there is to know about Bigfoot, you need to be doing your own channel and sharing what you know, not attacking those of us doing your work for you. All I'm doing is repeating stories, either that people send me or that I find online. I rewrite everything so that it's 100% original, but I'm generally going by what is sent to me and what I find when I search around. I don't know which of these stories are true and which might be folklore, and I have a feeling that you don't know either. If you were trained by a cryptid researcher, then I would ask you to share your research and your methodology with the rest of us. Although I do not view myself as a researcher, I view myself as a writer and artist who is presenting other people's personal experience or research for the most part. I was trained in paranormal and 14 research by John A. Keel, who wrote the Mothman Prophecies and other important books that you should definitely search out and read. I do know how it's done, and I do know the difference between research and hearsay. Generally, none or very little of what we present here on this channel would stand up as proof of anything in a court of law. This is a channel about folklore for the most part, and folklore, even though it can often turn out to be true or have truth behind it, would be considered hearsay in a legal sense. You're unlikely to find clear proof of the existence of any cryptid on this or any other YouTube channel. We're just sort of here sitting around the campfire, sharing spooky stories, and wondering how many of each of these stories might have truth behind them. That having been said, there are a number of you who seem to be requesting Dogman and Bigfoot battling or teaming up stories. I do have some of those I was going to do this month. I took such abuse from either a few nut jobs or maybe just one creep acting as several jerks last night that I'm remembering why I switched this channel from Bigfoot to Dogman in the first place. There are those who only want their opinion expressed about Bigfoot, but I'm sorry. Bigfoot is a cryptid. Humanity does not officially recognize it as a living thing, at least not yet. Any discussion of Bigfoot, until it is declared real by the scientific mainstream, is technically the sharing of legend and hearsay, again, at least for now. I don't know which legends are true or false, and I'm interested in hearing all the stories, until such time as we actually know enough about any of this subject to even be able to determine which stories are real or not. And in that spirit, we present this new account sent to us by someone claiming to be a local police officer. I do not know if this is true. The officer or the troll does not give me his or her name, nor do they provide the exact location where this all took place. He claims this is because he doesn't want to lose his job. Maybe that's true. Or maybe this is someone sitting in his mom's basement making the entire story up. Maybe it's someone living down the hall in my building trolling me. I have no way of knowing. But I do know this story freaked me out when I first read it. If this is real, this is a huge thing. Of course, it may be a figment of someone's imagination. I just can't say. So please keep all of this in mind as you listen to this next story, sent to us anonymously by someone claiming to be a highway patrol officer in a Midwestern state in the USA. He won't even say if he's talking about Michigan or Ohio or Wisconsin or where. But he seems adamant that the cryptid situation in the Midwest is about to hit a boiling point, and it might soon become impossible to keep this all hidden, even with a complicit corporate press machine lying constantly to cover up the existence of this unfortunate reality. When the Dogman and the Squatches take over your town, will it even be covered on the news? Or will it be covered over? Since none of us really know facts from lies any longer, it's going to have to become something we each do our own research on and come to our own conclusions about. I am not arguing for any one point of view, but I am arguing for more open-mindedness. If you know more about Bigfoot than the rest of us, attacking us is not going to spread what you know. Try sharing your information if you truly possess real answers. Will everyone believe you? Of course not. But more people will believe you than they do now when you bully everyone with a different or original angle or thought. If you call people who submit stories to us names when they have a different point of view from you, you're locking yourself in your own little dark closet, and your opinion ceases to matter to anyone. I don't listen to people bullying me, I just block them. How about you? So in the spirit of open curiosity, we present this next email sent in to me, which might be of vital importance, or might be utter gibberish, made up to trick me and you into believing something that isn't so. If you, in your location, know about anything which either supports or debunks the following account, I would love to hear from you. I am not presenting any of this as fact because I was not there. I'm presenting this for the usual purposes of entertainment and to see if this rings a bell with any viewers. Could this be real? Could it have happened near you? Do you have any more info to shed light on what I'm about to read? Or conversely, can you disprove any of the following account? In any of those cases, if you have anything to add, please either leave a comment or contact us via our email or phone number, both of which are mentioned at the very end of the show. And without further ado, let's launch into this particularly harrowing account, which I'm gonna call
If you want a coloring book full of monstrous delight, then give this a look. It'll give you a fright, right? Scary stories, coloring book, werewolf coloring book. And just to make your mind explode, it's a digital download. All it costs is $2.09, and then you will be feeling fine. Coloring monsters today, hey, it's a coloring book, hooray. Okay, link is in the description.
I saw Bigfoot knock the wind out of Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about two oversized cryptids in Pennsylvania. In fact, in the Poconos. You see, my uncle and I know how to stay in the Poconos and hunt and fish without spending a dime. We stay outside of the tourist places, and I mean just outside, as in camping in the woods, behind fancy expensive hotels and lodges. This used to work out fine for us. Except it seems that lately, both Dogman and Bigfoot have taken to haunting the same woodlands and forgotten places. Maybe they're on a budget too. So there's a fancy lake with a fancy lodge that a lot of tourists enjoy spending parts of their summer at, called Lake Naomi. If you've got the money to spend, they've got stuff for you to spend it on. It looks like a fun place to stay, at least from my vantage point sleeping in the woods. You see, there's another smaller lake to the south of Naomi called Pinecrest Lake. Some very nice homes are built on the lake, but if you approach it from the forest on the opposite side, and if you don't make a big ruckus, then you can often while a day of fishing away over there. That is what Uncle Bunk and I were doing when we were rudely interrupted by the craziest animal battle I have ever been witness to. We both had headphones on and were listening to loud music when two hairy upright walking creatures as large as bears chased each other up from behind us into the lake in front, landing on top of each other with such a force that water shot way up into the sky and rained it down on us for some time afterward. To say we were surprised would be an understatement. I was so shocked that I screamed like a lady in a horror movie, and I jumped up and down as I ran away in a stupid fashion. Like when you're having a quiet, slow day, then the single craziest thing you've ever lived through happens with no warning. You kind of freak out a bit. Uncle Bunk and I grabbed our rods and reels and ran back from the water's edge, staring at the two beasts fighting in the shallow edge of the lake. I had no idea what was happening, or what those two bear things were doing fighting in the surf, and my heart was beating harder in my chest than I've ever noticed it beating. I looked to Uncle Bunk for an answer, but he was cursing in a high-pitched voice, like some flipped-out grade school kid. When I looked back out at the splashing and screeching going on just past the beach, I could make out a very large humanoid figure fighting an even larger humanoid. Both were hairy, like the monsters in War of the Gargantuas, but they were very different kinds of animals once you were able to get a clear glance at them through the foam and the water and the chaos. The short version is that we were witnessing a Dogman bothering a much larger Sasquatch. I guess the Dogman was around 6 feet tall, but the Ape Man was far, far larger. Imagine a gorilla that got stretched up so that now it was twice as tall as before. Literally twice as tall. I mean, I was looking at something 11 or 12 feet in height, trying to convince the Dogman half his size to please stop bothering him. The upright dog-headed man would charge the Sasquatch, only to be met with the back of the Bigfoot's hand, sending him careening back in the direction he had come from. The Dogman would run in a circle around the Bigfoot to taunt him, and the Squatch would trip the dog by merely holding out one big foot. It was clear the Bigfoot was just trying to get from one location to another, but the oversized canine was not having it. The Dogman was willing to do anything to keep that Squatch from getting away, and yet that was all the Sasquatch wanted to do. Just get away and get back to his day. This fight was completely one way, and yet it was such a big fight that our whole day had to stop and wait to see if this was going to escalate or calm down. That area we were in is usually a lot more crowded with people than it was on that day, but I could still see some people on the opposite shore. They didn't seem to have noticed the two oversized man-things spraying water all around as they tore into each other right in front of our eyes. I have to say that even though the Dogman was the instigator, he was not apparently winning. In fact, I would say that the Sasquatch, who clearly didn't even want to have this battle, was probably winning so far. He was fighting as little as he could, while the Dogman seemed to be out for the kill. And even so, the Squatch's extreme size advantage seemed to be all he was going to need to win, whatever winning was going to mean in this context. Honestly, I was hoping the Dogman would wise up and accept that he could not win. Sooner or later, he was going to do something that really angered the Bigfoot. And then, that Dogman was going to have some horrible and ugly things done to him as punishment. I didn't want to see it. I wanted them to agree to disagree and part ways, you know. I sort of didn't want to see a winner because of what might have had to have been done to the loser in order to secure a win. This was not hunting for food or survival. This canine was going against nature. It was fighting for no real reason. If you go against nature, you will earn a particularly harsh comeuppance. Naturally. I really didn't want to witness any of that either. I've heard of what Bigfoot can get like when they fly into a rage, and I knew that none of us would be safe if it came to that. The Bigfoot was losing his temper, and when he rebuffed the smaller cryptid by this point, it was more abruptly than before, and included shouting and a display of his formidable and scary-looking teeth. This was about to turn into a real fight. If it did, I wondered how long it might go on, and what the collateral damage might be. Would the homeowners across the lake even notice what was happening? It seemed that we were the only ones seeing any of this. The Dogman was now making himself small and snapping at the Bigfoot's heels. Turning around and bellowing at the canine caused the Dogman to stand up to his full height as well and yap back at the Squatch. Finally, I saw this look on the Bigfoot's face that reminded me of the look my father used to get when I said something that made him lose his temper. That Sasquatch had just officially had enough. My uncle and I ducked. The Squatch hauled off and belted the upright canine in his belly, clearly surprising him and knocking the wind out of him in the same moment. The Dogman's eyes crossed, and he collapsed, limp, to the ground. Triumphant, the Bigfoot beat his chest and roared at his easily defeated opponent. He bent down to yell in the Dogman's ear. He stomped on the ground to let the devil himself know that Bigfoot was once again triumphant. Furiously indignant, he picked up random rocks off the ground, each of them too heavy for me to lift with 2 hands. Then, he flung them so high in the air and so far away that I never could see where they landed. This was an angry and frustrated cryptid, and it was blowing off steam in a way that only a Bigfoot could. So while the Squatch was raging and hurling heavy stones clear out of the county, the Dogman managed to get up on all fours and dash away in a staggered fashion into the woods. I was glad it was over. I was grateful I didn't have to see him getting torn apart, and I was glad he had run away. Now as soon as the Bigfoot calmed down and left, we could return to our fishing and our quiet afternoon. The thing is, the Dogman was not actually finished. He was down, sure, but he was not out. He soon came charging back out of the woods. But now, he wasn't alone. There was an old gray wolf, well over 9 feet tall. He was nearly as big as the Sasquatch. There were 2 others who appeared to be young adults, racing in behind the larger and older one. This must be the young Dogman's family. His father and his older brothers, possibly. That Bigfoot might have outclassed the young Dogman, but he was now outnumbered, and the 3 new adversaries were each nearly his size. I'm not too proud to admit that I took off running at the sight of this. My uncle grabbed me, though, and made me turn and look. Not only had I taken off running in fear, but so had that Squatch. It ran into the woods alongside the lake that they had all come out of, and we watched the Dogman push trees over sideways to charge back into those woods, all of them chasing that particularly dangerous bull Sasquatch that would have been only too happy to leave them alone. I have to say, Bigfoot and Dogman are two species with very different personalities. The Dogmen are so freaking hyper and murderous. The Squatches seem to just want to be left alone to live their lives. I'm sure they are capable of great violence, but they do seem less prone to actually displaying real-world violence. Dogman, on the other hand, is probably violent in his sleep. He just seems to me like a land shark, like a killing machine. If these two primitive kinds of people are really at war over the American wilderness, I don't really want to think about what the results might be long term. One species or the other could very well be wiped out. Is our remaining wildland enough for both the Dogman and the Bigfoot? I have to ask these questions these days. I mean, if not me, then whom? After all, I saw Bigfoot knock the wind out of Dogman.
The summer's over, face of deer. It's that hoodie time of year. And you know times are never dull when you got the hoodie with the scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Scary skull. Hoodie, scody, skull. Hoodie, skull. Scary skull. Pull over hoodie. Wear a toe string, it's a goodie. You can buy it without a prescription. Just follow the link in this video's description.
Thanks, Biggie. And thanks to all of you for watching this far. If you liked it, please click like. If you'd like to see more of our work, please subscribe. And also click that bell icon if you'd like to be notified when we put out a new episode. To become an executive producer, you can donate to us through the thanks button under each of our videos or through our paypal.me/PeterBernard209 page. To receive cool perks like secret uncensored Dogman episodes far too wild to ever run on this channel, you can become a YouTube channel member by clicking the join button, or join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Joining either at the $3 a month level or above gets you access to our over 25 hours of secret uncensored Dogman stories available nowhere else. Do you have a scary story about Dogman or some other kind of high strangeness that happened to you? Let us know by emailing us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or by leaving us a voicemail message at 804-LA-SCARY. You may need to call back on that one. It cuts off after, I think, 3 minutes. And if you don't want to do any of that stuff, thank you for simply watching to the end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.